Hello and welcome to Brick Speak. I'm your host, Brigadier Rakesh Bhatia. In today's episode, we will talk about the Laoshan offensive operations of 1984. Though this operation did not have major impact on the overall outcome of the Sino-Vietnam conflict, but it played major role in terms of lessons learned by PLA and subsequent reorientation, re-equipping and reorganizing PLA. Before going to the subject proper, let's talk about a bit of background. Immediately after Beijing had withdrawn, China wanted to discuss all issues which were responsible for deteriorating relationship between Vietnam and China, which included Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia, territorial disputes, and ethnic Chinese problems in Vietnam. These have been covered in detail in the previous episodes. On the other hand, Hanoi wanted to restrict this dialogue about the borders only. A dead end was reached on 8th of March 1980, where China called off the negotiations. On the other hand, Vietnamese knew that the Chinese could invade Vietnam again. The general mobilization, which Vietnam ordered in March 1979, continued, and Vietnam increased its military presence along the northern border, matching China's buildup. The 1980s border conflict between China and Vietnam can be divided into four phases. First phase, which began in April 79, continued till November 80, where both sought to reconfigure their border defenses and continued to harass each other. Beginning May 1981, the second phase began, which continued till November 1984. PLA undertook more offensive actions against Vietnamese occupied mountain ranges but restricted itself to the borders. Third phase, beginning from December 1984, continued till October 87, where the fighting intensified, especially in Laoshan area. Both sides committed large number of forces to both offensive and counter-offensive operations. November 87 to March 90 marks the fourth phase, where a stalemate between the two countries was reached. PLA forces conducted special operations until withdrawal of last field army unit from the border region. Deng Xiaoping felt that political and economic pressure on Vietnam for 3 to 5 years would inflict substantial hardship and also add to Soviet Union's burden. He expected change in Vietnamese leadership, and this could lead to ultimate fall of Vietnam. In brief, the operations which were carried out from 1981 to 84 was at Fakashan, which has been covered in one of the previous episodes, and also along Laoshan. In 1984, PLA concentrated on Laoshan area. End of 1979, the Chinese borders had been heavily fortified, thereby reducing its vulnerability. At the same time, China continued to offer negotiation to the Vietnamese on the border issue. Beijing believed that negotiations may resolve the problem, but treated talks as a continuation of China's battlefield against Vietnam in political, diplomatic, and propaganda arenas. In 1980s, Vietnam continued to occupy key mountain ranges and ridge lines crossing the border between the two countries. It occupied 28 hills along the border. Beijing responded to provocations with the tit-for-tat strategy, fought against the intrusions, and won most of these battles. China could not afford another large-scale cross-border operation into Vietnam, so this could have jeopardized China's ongoing economic reforms. Chinese leaders also faced a credibility issue. Even though China believed that China had taught Vietnam a lesson in 1979, but their ultimate aim of Vietnam stopping its aggression against Cambodia did not happen. In fact, Vietnam moved against Thailand as well. This is the general location of Laoshan. It is a combination of few hills extending from east to west, approximately 4 kilometers from the Chinese-Vietnam border. Both PLA and the Vietnamese army were in competition for control of these mountains along the borders. The average height of these mountains was approximately 1200 meters. The conflict peaked in 1984 over the hills in the Laosan area. These hills you can see in the Google image. There was a large volume of artillery that was brought upon by PLA on Vietnamese defense, and some Western scholars have called it artillery diplomacy. It was intended to exert pressure on Vietnam to exit from Cambodia, but failed. Vietnam adopted the approach of wait and see. The overall offensive can be divided into number of phases. Phase 1, where offensive operations were launched to seize Vietnamese position along the Yunnan-Vietnam border in April, and the Vietnamese army responded with counterattack until the end of the year. Phase 2 began when China rotated the PLA forces from other military regions through Laoshan from 1985 to 1989. Recall, I had mentioned that Laoshan was used as a testing ground for PLA. Let's answer this question: why China chose Laosan? It was a mountainous, remote, and difficult area. Did not pose a serious threat to Vietnamese. Deng wanted to signal that China could not tolerate any loss even in a remote area. Analyzing the Battle of Lao Shan, 256 Chinese artillery pieces bombarded Vietnam territory every day, allegedly hitting 414 targets. Decoy ground attacks were launched to lure troops away from their fortified position. Deception was an important part of the operation. On 28th April, Chinese forces opened up their ground attacks on Laoshan. 5 regiments participated. In next several hours of bitter fighting, the PLA soldiers secured each hilltop one by one. Troops undertaking the penetration task, however, failed to reach its staging position on time. Analyzing Battle of Laoshan, it was courageous operation, but poor performance brought criticism of the leadership. Leaders lacked understanding of local conditions, slope, thick forest, and bad weather. They needed more than 4 hours, but estimated that it would take only 2. Worse, the leaders refused to accept changes. At the same time, another small-scale operation along with the Laoshan was launched in an area called Jaishan. PLA units experienced the same difficulty at Laoshan, but here they responded with flexibility and ingenuity. The reason was that the lessons learned in Laoshan were applied while undertaking operations in Jaishan. They never heard in the past postponing HR by the commander was a bold decision. It allowed the exhausted troops to take a break before launching a fresh operation. The Vietnamese offensive was to split Chinese forces between Laoshan and Dong Song along Song Lo River, which is also called Clear River. Here again, Chinese decided to use technology like night vision devices and ground target indicator radars that helped them win. Timely logistics was also crucial, which China did successfully. These were the lessons learned in the previous operations, and this led to victory, thereby strengthening hand of Deng to go in for reorganization and reorientation of PLA. Chinese understood that military domain is more important than the political domain. Laoshan, as I said, was used by PLA as training ground where troops could gain combat experience. By end of 1989, seven field armies, which included infantry, artillery, anti-aircraft, engineers, anti-chemical warfare, early warning units were sent for a 6 months to 1 year deployment. During this time, PLA defended an area of 23 kilometers by 35 kilometers. They created 120 defensive positions, dug more than 47,000 meters of trenches and 36 tons, 10,600 fortifications which were able to withstand an artillery shell of 122 gun were also created. PLA Air Force pilots flew deep, which provided Chinese ground forces with photo images of more than 1,000 Vietnamese military objects. Viewers will recall that nothing of this nature was undertaken during the actual operations of Sino-Vietnam War. Another unique characteristics of this war was frequent shift from offensive to defensive operations because troops on both sides not only positioned themselves so close to each other but also interlocked their positions. Mountainous terrain and harsh climate aggravated the complexity of battlefield environment. Fighting under these tough conditions wanted a regular supply, which was overcome by PLA. To conclude, Laosan symbolized animosity between China and Vietnam throughout the 1980s and served as a battleground in which the two countries' military forces contested their will and capabilities. As far as Vietnamese defensive operations are concerned, they engaged in active offensive action against the PLA, choosing Laoshan to avoid giving the impression that Vietnam was weak. Military District 2, about which we have already spoken, set up an artillery command post at Haigan, brought 313th Division up to full strength, and sent large number of reinforcements to Thanh Thuy area. By early June, Vietnam had assembled substantially strong force, which included 8 infantry regiments and 18 RT battalion, than the Chinese forces in the region. With this, I come to the end of today's episode. Keep working hard, all the best, and Jai Hind.